I did want to make mention of this because I don't know how many people realized it. I saw Brutus post about this on Twitter, and I said, you know what? He's absolutely right. It was the 30-year anniversary on July 4th of the parasailing accident that almost killed Brutus the Barber Beefcake. Yesterday was 30 years to the day of the incident, which is one of the most horrific injuries that I have ever heard of in wrestling or to a wrestler. And it didn't even happen in a wrestling ring. It happened as far away from a wrestling ring as you can get. And there are probably people who either don't know the story or don't know all the details of the story, so I'll just tell it real quick because it's just shocking. Shocking what happened to this guy and the fact that he even survived, let alone went on to wrestle again. But at the time, back in 1990, Beefcake was getting ready to challenge Mr. Perfect. That was going to be the match. That was the planned match for Summerslam in August. It was going to be Brutus Beefcake against Mr. Perfect for the Intercontinental Championship. The Beefcake had already been scheduled to, I don't know if he was going to win the title, but he was going to challenge for the title against the Honky Tonk Man at SummerSlam in '88. Funny enough. That, I think, was just a worked injury. I think it was an injury angle. That's when they substituted the Ultimate Warrior, and the Warrior came in like 30 seconds, and he beat Honky Tonk Man. Well, fast forward a couple of years, and Beefcake once again is scheduled to challenge for the IC title. And he had already handed Perfect his first televised pinfall loss at WrestleMania 6, which was dumb. But to be fair, Beefcake was very popular back then. He was over. And he was beating Perfect on all of the house shows that summer up to that point. He was beating him by disqualification, but they were doing the loop everywhere, and he was beating him night after night after night, DQ after DQ after DQ. And then he got a day off. He got a rare day off for people back then because the schedule was inhumane that those wrestlers kept. He got a day off on the 4th of July. And so he went out to enjoy his day off. He was down in Florida. He was hanging out with Brian Blair. There was a parasailing accident where this woman, she was, I'm a little fuzzy on exactly whose boat it was or who the woman was or whatever. But anyway, she was parasailing. Her knees went right into Brutus's face at 35 miles an hour. He had turned his head at just the wrong moment, I think, to see where she was. Because I think the boat had started to go. According to him, when I've heard him tell the story before, and maybe in his book he mentioned this too, but I think the person driving the boat had started to go. He was trying to get the person's attention, tell him don't go. But anyway, he turned his head at just the wrong moment, and she smashed into his face with both of her knees. I think she broke one of her knees on his face. And his face was completely shattered. Every single bone in his face. He broke every bone in his face to where they basically just turned to dust. So his face, it was as if his face had been caved in and collapsed. People had to literally, I don't know who it was who came onto the scene, if it was a friend or a medic or whoever it was, had to literally take their hand and stick their hand in his mouth to pry his mouth open just so that he could breathe, because he basically didn't have a nose. I mean, his nose was hanging, whatever was left of his nose, he couldn't breathe. If that person didn't pry his mouth open, he would not have been able to breathe and he would have died. But it was described as if his face just looked like a piece of meat. His nose was gone. His nasal cavity was completely crushed. He went totally blind for a while in both eyes because I guess the optic nerve had been damaged. It took that took 7 hours of surgery alone just to restore his vision, let alone all the other hours of surgery. They had to bring in a team of like 15 or 16 doctors to work on this guy. But just imagine that. Imagine somebody had to take their hand and stick their hand in his mouth to pry it open and just to keep him alive. No jaw, Just his facial muscles just gone. What is there to hold up your face, right? If your bones are all gone, what is there to hold up your facial features? It's like your face sags. It's like somebody let the air out of your face. Like something out of a horror movie. He should not have lived. Every description I've ever heard of the accident from him or people who were on the scene, he should not have survived. It is unbelievable that he survived that accident that day. So when he was in the hospital, they had to sew his eyelids shut. They put him in a medically induced coma and then very slowly started to bring him out of it. I think they gave him a tracheotomy to help him breathe. He was a mess. 8 titanium plates in his face, 32 screws, over 100 feet of steel wire to essentially remake this guy's face. They had to peel his skin down. You ever see the movie Face Off? Of course you have, right? You've seen the movie Face Off. That was Brutus Beefcake. They had to peel the skin down to work on his face, or to rebuild his face. And I know in his book, he told the story about Hulk Hogan, who, to Hogan's credit, Hogan was good friends with Beefcake going back to when they were very young, and Hogan flew in to be with him and to give him words of encouragement. I think Hogan even let him, when he got out of the hospital, let him stay at his place. You know, Hogan was the friend, so Hogan was there for support. But Beefcake in his book told the story about Hogan visiting him in the hospital and Hogan wanting to just get him up on his feet. Gotta walk around, gotta get you moving. And so he took him in the hallway. They were going for a walk down the hallway in the hospital. And as they're walking, and this obviously was after they unsewed his eyelids, I guess, but as they're walking in the hallway, and it's Hogan and Beefcake, so keep that in mind when you hear certain details and you hear certain things, or things that may sound like they're exaggerated, because they're workers. That is what they do. Beefcake is the same guy who was asked in an interview after the Ultimate Warrior passed away. He had horrible things to say about the Ultimate Warrior. He was no fan of the Ultimate Warrior. But after the Warrior passed away, he was doing this interview. And the person asked him, he goes, he started asking him about steroid use back then, right, in the golden age, in the 80s, the early 90s. And he was asking him, he goes, how prevalent was it? Was it prevalent? Was there a lot of that going on back then in the 80s and the early 90s in terms of steroid use? And Beefcake's response was, no, it wasn't very common at all. It is hard to take anybody seriously who would say such a thing. So just keep that in mind. But anyway, he talks about walking in the hallway, and all of a sudden, he looks over at Hogan, and his eyeball falls out of his head. Beefcake's, not Hogan's. And so his eyeball pops out, and it's dangling, I guess, next to his cheek or on his cheek. Hogan, I've heard Bruce Pritchard tell the story, and Hogan tried to no-sell it. He's like, holy shit, brother. Or he tried to not panic in that instance. If that were me, I'd go running for the hills. Some friend I would be. But yeah, apparently his eye just fell out because it wasn't supported by anything. Maybe he blinked. I don't know. He did something he shouldn't have done, and out came his eyeball, and it's just hanging there. I guess that's one of the reasons they had sewn his eyelids shut. They didn't want him moving the wrong way or blinking, or I guess who knows the kind of damage that it could have caused. But anyway, thankfully for him, he had his Screen Actors Guild card. And so with that SAG card came SAG Insurance, which took care of pretty much everything. I think it paid for most, if not all, of his medical expenses tied into the accident. I'm sure that was tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars in medical debt, at the very least, in this country, that he would have been responsible for. Because pro wrestlers, especially back then, they didn't have health insurance. Now, WWE, I don't think you're able to even be in the company. They kind of mandate that you have to go out and buy your own health insurance. Obviously, they will cover the cost of any injuries incurred in the ring. WWE's always been good about that. But I believe that they actually mandate now that all of their talent have to go out on their own, and you have to buy health insurance before you will be allowed to either sign with the company or cleared to compete, or whatever the rules are. But back then, give me a break. Give me a break. If you were a Roddy Piper or a Terry Funk, if you were in movies, then yeah, Piper probably had SAG insurance too. He was probably a SAG member. I don't know how Beefcake got a SAG card. Apparently it had something to do with No Holds Barred. Brutus Beefcake was not in the movie No Holds Barred, which is kind of surprising. You would think Hogan would get him a cameo in there. Maybe he was on set. That's the only thing I can deduce, is that he was hanging out with Hogan. He was on the set. Maybe they did shoot stuff with him and it got left on the cutting room floor. I don't know, but he definitely was not in the movie. He's not even credited in the movie. But apparently he was able to get his SAG card. I'll be honest with you, I think all wrestlers should be eligible to apply for SAG membership. After all, Vince McMahon loves to say, well, we make movies, pal. Some of them literally have made movies. A lot of them have. Maybe not all good movies, but they should be allowed to apply for SAG membership and get the insurance. I don't know why they don't try, or if they've tried and they got rejected. I would love to know the reason why. I don't know why more wrestlers don't do that. Somehow, Beefcake came back. He did end up wrestling again, but his career was never the same. I mean, it's almost like the tale of two careers. That first career that he had for himself, where he was super over. Brutus the Barber Beefcake, you could say what you want about the guy as a human being. You could say what you want about the guy as a wrestler. He wasn't very good, but he was over with that character, with that gimmick, with the big barber shears, with the big clippers. He was over. In 88, 89, 90, up until his accident, he was over. And he had the great benefit of having his best friend till the end in Hulk Hogan, who got him a lot of opportunities that I'm sure he otherwise would not have gotten were it not for his friendship with Hogan. For example, in 89, he and Hogan were tagging up in pay-per-view matches. SummerSlam 89, which actually is a great match, I have to say. If you've not seen the main event of SummerSlam 89, Hogan and Beefcake against the Macho King and Zeus. Great match. Then they had the No Holds Barred, the match in the movie, and they did the cage match, the tag team cage match. So believe me, Brutus benefited greatly from his relationship, his friendship over the years with Hulk Hogan, right up until the WCW days. But on his own, in the late 80s with that character, he was over. And the accident ended all of that. He was never the same. He was never as popular. He came back. He wrestled only briefly, really, only sporadically in WWE. They had the big comeback in 93, the WrestleMania 9 match. That was pretty much it. I mean, I don't know exactly when he left the company. If he left when Hulk left in the summer of 93, I believe it was. But he didn't really do much. He went to WCW. They tried out no less than probably half a dozen names and gimmicks for this guy. Brother Brutai, the Booty Man, the Disciple, Zodiac. There was at least one other one I know that I'm forgetting. Nothing worked. He just bounced around from gimmick to gimmick, name to name. He was just a guy. He was background. He was a background guy. That was it. But we did get one memorable thing as a result of that accident, and that was the barbershop. They gave him his own talk show segment when he initially came back to TV. I mean, he was trying this run-in man gimmick where he was wearing a mask. He was very tentative, though. He was very tentative, even though he claims the doctors told him that your face is going to be even stronger than it was before. It's like these pitchers that go and have Tommy John surgery, and they're like, oh, your arm is going to be even stronger than it was before. There were stories, I think it was like a Real Sports special I saw many years ago, where there were parents who were like sending their kids, like little leaguers, to go have Tommy John surgery when they didn't even need Tommy John surgery, because these parents have poison brains. There's a word for that. It's called child abuse. They were sending their kids to have the surgery done because, we heard that the Tommy John surgery will actually make their arm stronger. Who does that? What parent does that? So I guess it's kind of like a similar thing where he claims that the doctor said to him, your face is going to be, you could have the same accident. Forget headbutts and punches in the ring. You could have the same accident that you had, and your face with all the titanium and the plates and screws and everything in it probably would be able to withstand the impact. But I guess he was very tentative, and the company maybe was very tentative. Maybe they saw him as a liability. I don't know. That whole Running Man thing, I don't think he was ever unmasked. It lasted for a few weeks, and that was the end of that. And so they gave him a talk show segment called The Barbershop. And I seem to recall something memorable happened on that show. Can't quite put my finger on it. I think it was the time that Marty Jannetty, the coward that he is, tried to dive through the barbershop window to escape the wrath of Shawn Michaels. So at least something good came out of all of that.